Welcome back to episode 9. We are back again with the science plane. And I've taken a few notes from the interesting form that it took on the crash last episode. Gone a little bit more into the flying wing side of things, although I may have actually forgotten to allocate some of my controls here. Let me just double check all of my control surfaces are in the correct direction. And yeah, everything is looking good. Again, I skimped out on the ferrum analysis because I was feeling lazy. So we're gonna really just fly this thing by the seat of our pants here, although we can't actually feel anything. Rather, Jonas is going to be flying by the seat of his pants. And we're just gonna take off. It's the same two interstellar turbofan engines. This is a bit of a heavier plane, I think, so we won't be going nearly as quick of an acceleration, but we should be still getting in the same speed range. And this thing takes off even smoother than the first one. I added a slight dihedral to the wings there. You can see angled up on the edges. You know, a dihedral is something you see pretty often in planes. Also, birds have it. But essentially what it does is when you're doing a banking turn like I am right now, it essentially means that you still have a small amount of lift that is pointing upwards. And in fact, on the wing that is lower to the ground, because it is there is a greater kind of upwards facing cross-section, it basically has a balancing effect, where if I were to, say, let this thing kind of sit at a banked angle, then it would naturally kind of restore itself. A little like you see there, although it does kind of want to fall back to the ground. So I'm not really sure where I want to take this thing. I don't think I can land this in the highlands or the mountains, because that would probably end up destroying the vehicle. So what's most likely going to happen is I'm going to fly over the mountains and land in the desert, and then take off from there and go somewhere else.
Now, this plane actually flew surprisingly well, excuse me. I think the problem that I tend to run into the most when designing planes and other such aircraft in KSP is I make the wings too small, and so I end up having to fly either really fast or just end up having it be really unstable. So yeah, here I cut the power and do a test of the gliding. The stability control seems to be playing with my yaw there and putting a weird oscillation, but this thing glides really well. It's almost able to fly perfectly horizontally, although it does lose a bit of speed when I do that. And this whole section here is under no engine power. We're just completely in a flat glide. Losing altitude very slowly. Of course, the terrain is uneven and sloping as well, which is why the radar altimeter is being a little odd. But this thing flies really well. We'll have to take some notes for this when we actually start building planes that will do things like go to space and fly into orbit and return from orbit. So I bring the power back online, and at this point what I'm going to do is test this thing's stall characteristics. So I'm going to fly basically as straight up as I can in a pretty steep arc, and that way I gain some height, so I have some safety and some insurance in case I end up completely losing control. But I'm also going very slow, and this will allow me to really see what regime this aircraft will stall in and how its stability performs there. So cut the power, and you can see at about, 70, 80 meters per second, yeah, you can see in the Ferrum flight indicator there it said minor stalling. And I don't want to actually kill Jonas here, so I bring it back down into a bit of a steeper dive to gain some speed back, to gain back the control. And yeah, at this point, we're going to go for a landing in the desert over there so that we can try to get the science from that, because that's not a biome we visited. We have these air brakes courtesy of B9. Not very effective, but that is how air brakes do in real life. So now back to real time for the landing.
Alright, coming in for our landing here. Once again, we are coming over a town. I just seem to keep getting myself over these cities here. But we are coming in at a pretty good glide slope here. This thing glides really, really well. I'm honestly impressed with, like, I would normally not make something that flies this good. So I feel like I've outdone myself a little bit here. But this thing, I want to land at about 100 meters per second, because 150, which is what we're going at right now, that's a little bit fast. And it does seem a little bit like the ground might be uneven here, which was, if you remember, the downfall of our previous iteration of this vehicle. However, I do have a bit more care with this, and I've also installed air brakes onto it here, which, with Ferrum Aerospace, are not very effective, which is kind of more accurate to how air brakes kind of work in real life when you put them in an actual airflow at speed, but it'll help us nonetheless. And I really can't tell if the ground here is actually textured like that or not. So this detail on the ground is making it a little hard for me to gauge the quality of the ground I'm coming down onto. Bit of a hill here. So I want to be careful. I want to err on the side of landing a bit too slow, because I can always just throttle up and get out of there. If I'm coming in too fast, though, not a whole lot that I can do. Flare. Okay, and flare, flare, flare. Whoa. And once again, we... Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. Well, that was a bit more destructive than the other one. None of the experiments survived, and it looks like the landing gear is bouncing around and having a fun time. Well, so much for that. Back to the drawing board, I guess. Although this is the desert. Jonas, you survived this crash. Why don't you take some sandals and rocks, apparently? It looks hot out here. Sand is dry and loose. Well, it seems we're on our home planet. Well, that was not the most successful mission ever. It looks like we will have to unlock further plane technology in the later nodes. So much for that, I guess. And after a few weeks of not having a whole lot of things to do, we are now drawing close to the sun skimmer's perihelion, its closest approach to the body that bathes Kerbin in its light. We do not have connection at this time. However, we would still be able to run the experiments. And there are currently 5 days until we reach perihelion. Look at it there. It's tremendous. It takes up so much of the sky. Now, we may not actually get close enough, unfortunately, for near-sun science, which is a very tragic circumstance. I also need to rename this to be a probe, not a relay. So that way I don't get all my things confused. But yeah, we just sit here and watch as the sun grows larger. And we've picked up some spin, apparently. Picking up tons of speed. Maybe we'll break 40 kilometers per second at our closest approach. We are starting to get some heat. But 1 day left. 5 hours. 4 hours. We are getting pretty warm in here. 3 hours until our closest approach with the sun. 2 hours. Just 1 hour left. And momentarily, we will be reaching our periapsis around the sun. At this distance, we are still counting as in space high, which we're pretty close to the sun. I'm not sure how much closer we'd have to get for that. But there's the closest we've ever sent anything to the sun. You can see almost all the planets from here. There's Jool, Eve, Duna, Kerbin is somewhere around here. Yep, there's Kerbin. And that bright spot next to it is Minmus there. What else? Could we see Moho? I don't think we can. It might be on the other side of the sun. There it is, our nearest neighbor. Still taunting us with its secrets. And now, we have our first planetary transfer window, which is to Eve. And this is the vehicle that I've devised that is going to help us get to Eve. I've named it the Prune, because Eve is purple, and so are prunes. We're accumulating waste heat for some reason. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Oh, the radiator panel. Yes, of course. So, I'm not going to give you guys a sneak peek into the fairing just yet. But, we are going to lift off. Now, the actual encounter window proper has not arrived yet. It will be here in about a couple of days. But the calculations provided in the game are not entirely accurate, so I like to give myself a bit more of a window, just in case, the actual window comes and passes a little bit later. I love the sound of that engine there. This is just the simple stock mainsail here, and it is going to get us a good way of the way into orbit. It is one of the most powerful engines available at this point in the game. Although, once we progress further and we start getting some more science, we'll really start getting into the KW packs and the interstellar packs as well, which will give us even beefier parts and better engines to work with.
I mean, at this point in the series, we've really only had a ton of experience with the KW parts, and even then I haven't been using them as much because some of those engines are really powerful, and I've just not been building craft that are large enough, heavy enough that I actually end up needing to use those. And a lot of the interstellar parts come very far up the tech tree as well. So now we go on into that Poodle engine up there, and we're deploying now the solar panels on this probe. This will be... I haven't decided if I want to send this thing into orbit. I think it has enough Delta V to get into orbit around Eve. Or if I wanted to do a flyby return mission. But yeah, basically just getting myself into orbit here. And now that we've gotten ourselves most of the way, just have to circularize. This thing's reaction wheels are very weak, so I have to actually use the gimbaling of the engine there to get us oriented. And now it's time to plan the transfer for Eve. And I get a little caught up with the moon there. I don't know if you can tell, but those markers are very much in the wrong spots for a transfer window. So, yeah, at this point I realize I should probably not have used the game's built-in transfer window planning, because that tends to be pretty inaccurate, and I've had it lie to me before, like it did just now. Like, this is just not the Eve encounter window, even though it said it was. But nonetheless, we get the maneuver set up. It is going to be very aggressive and use a ton of Delta V, but I think I've pretty significantly overbuilt this. I'll probably have to slow down by roughly the same amount once we actually get to Eve. So it may end up being a flyby and return type of mission, which is pretty unfortunate. But we get started on this burn. 2 kilometers per second, way more than you normally need for an Eve transfer. It's usually about like 1.2 kilometers per second, but that is just the nature of the transfer window. So in the future, I don't want this to happen again, so I'm probably going to go with something like the transfer window planner, which is actually very accurate and gives you actual mathematical analysis of transfer windows and delta V's that you need. So here I plot the course correction that I'm going to need to do to get my encounter nice and close to Eve, set myself the alarm so that I can actually switch back to the craft when the time comes. And now we have that other antenna there that we're going to deploy. In the meantime, our technology will probably allow us to communicate across the gap. But that will have to be in the future when we actually see this thing again.
And this here is something very ambitious. We're going to take this to Minmus, because I want to continue exploring Minmus and getting more science from there, and also building out my communications network a little bit further into the Kerbal system. You'll notice there are no fairings on this. That is because I have not invented fairings big enough to mount onto these 2.5 meter parts. So we're just gonna hope that this works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And you know what? It's gonna be fun, and we're gonna see how this is gonna play out. So we also have a couple of exploration and science contracts on Minmus as well, which will be fulfilled by this mission, and some extra goals like putting a relay station on the surface to constantly be monitoring our communications traffic from far distances, and to help us, of course, with other endeavors inside the Kerbal system as well, the Kerbin system. Going again with the same launch window trick. Launching during the night, why not? And 3, 2, 1, liftoff. Oh dear. Okay. Check EO staging, I guess. Glad it's still staying upright. That was not supposed to happen. Okay. So this time, we've added some struts, including some very large, heavy-duty struts. I'm not entirely sure what the issue is. It should be attached to this decoupler here. And it doesn't look like the booster itself is having its own internal decoupler that gets activated when that happens. So if this doesn't work, I honestly don't know what will. So we'll get everything lined up again. And go on until our window. Just warping until we're lined up with everything. Just a little bit more. And then after this, we launch due south. Alright, third time's the charm. Or second time's the charm. Okay, 3, 2, 1. And that seems to have fixed it. So I guess, yeah, those boosters are really powerful. Too strong for their own good. Now the question is, when they separate, are they going to do it reasonably or no? And I hope that they don't immediately come back and kill me, because that would be not a desirable end to all of this struggling with these boosters. Moment of truth. And clean separation. Alright, so we now have Kimby, Garrick, and Jonas. These 3 are going on a historic mission. The first mission to feature more than one crew at a time. We have a thrust-to-weight ratio that is less than 1. Slight oversight on my part. That actually may turn out to be a bit of a problem. We are losing speed pretty quickly. You know what? We're just going to ride this up. We're burning fuel. And I have faith that this will turn out fine, even though we are slipping sideways. Our arc is flattening. Wow, there are many problems with this launcher. Come on, 0.91. You can do it. You can do it, I believe in you. We're picking up speed. And we're at 0.97 for us to wait. Come on. Boosters are hitting the ground. Come on, we're so close. More than one. I'm going to start pitching over, although I'm afraid that if I do, I'm going to lose all this altitude. Okay. Wow, this was really not thought out well. Okay. Building speed. Hovering at about 100 meters per second vertical speed. This is less than ideal. Although we do have a lot of delta V in those upper stages, but they kind of were relying on us being higher up than this when I ended up going to them. Okay, time to apoapsis is rising. That's the number I should have been keeping track of, really. Time to apoapsis is rising. Very slowly, but it is rising. And the next stage will actually have a lot more thrust to weight with a KW engine. So honestly, I can start focusing a little bit more on my horizontal speed. Time to apoapsis is kind of holding constant. It is going up, but slowly. So if I hold this attitude, then I should be fine. I hope. The main problem is I don't want my trajectory to go too flat. I don't want to have more horizontal speed than I need, because then I may end up taking on some heat as well. Of course, I don't seem to have had any problems, ironically, with not having a fairing on this giant open section here. Although that's not really been a problem because we have not been going fast enough where that becomes an issue. Okay, about 30 seconds to apoapsis. I think we can make this into orbit, but it will be a battle. Okay, and we're about to lose this stage. There we go. Now this is a very strong engine. This is from the KW pack. And I'm basically just going to start burning up, because I need vertical speed, I need altitude. And I need to not be going so fast, so low, because that's going to end up being a problem. And it's those struts that are catching on the heating there. But this is, at this point, pretty recoverable, I think. We may not have enough fuel to make it to min-miss, actually. Which is bad. We're gonna... So we'll have about 400 meters per second in here. I think we can make it if we go very carefully and we just play by the book. So now I really just need to fly this super carefully. My time to apoapsis is hovering at about 1 minute 8 seconds. Staying constant, so that's good. I'm not going to burn any more fuel than I have to for this, because any delta V that we can get is going to be precious. Okay, I'm going to throttle back. And I think we are doing fine. How's our angles looking? I could go a little more angled. Now, I don't want to point too far off of my velocity vectors, because that would also be a problem. Because then we're getting into cosine losses. Which is just when you're pointing at an angle that is not directly at your velocity, you lose delta V proportional to the cosine of the angle between your position and your velocity vector. But I think we're doing all right. I think. We're going to have just barely enough fuel, and we're going to be in a bit of a lower orbit, but I think that's fine. And we've made it out of the atmosphere. So I'm just going to point prograde and hope for the best. And we're going to get optimistic in here and deploy the solar panels and the antennas as well, because why not? We're at least going into space. Like, we could say that much. We've made it to space so far. The question is just, can we actually accomplish our mission? So I'm going to hold it there and wait until we get to apoapsis, which is going to be 75 kilometers. A little lower than I like, but it'll do. It'll serve our purposes. And then once we're there, we're just going to start circularizing. About 300, 250 meters per second. needed for that. So let's just start. I'm going to keep the throttle fairly low because I don't want my apoapsis to go too far ahead of me. And this stage has lots of thrust. Like, we're almost at a G of acceleration right now. Even at 1/3 throttle. I'm going to throttle back even more. So now I need to be very, very conservative with the fuel that I have and manage my resources well enough to last us all the way to Minmus. Life support's not an issue. We've got 100 days of life support in here. They've got ages before life support becomes a problem. I think we'll be fine for at least encountering Minmus. I can say that much. Okay. Now we're in circular orbit. It's time to plot our transfer. So, we are going to have to ditch this stage partway through and burn a good chunk of fuel too. Oh, this is going to be cutting it close.
And cutting it close it will be, but we'll have to see the actual approach and orbit and landing in future episodes. Until next time.